Okay, so the first question was what it was like. I want to take the second question first. The second question is about someone warning the administration of Virginia Tech about the shooting and no one listening. How do you choose to tell a story, and what if people don't listen? And I think that for a playwright or a dramatic writer, and you're thinking about the landscape, the political landscape, the world as we see it, and the problems that are there, there's an urge, I think, that a lot of people have, myself included, to address some of the urgent, dangerous, horrifying stories of our age in the theater, on stage, and I think that's a great impulse. The thing that I have to remember for myself is that you can't just throw yourself at an idea or an issue. It has to kind of find its way towards you. For example, I was really troubled by the Iraq War, but I had no idea how to find a way to dramatize any of my feelings about that. And I think that's the key, is like you have to find your entryway into a story to make it compelling and dramatic and interesting on stage. Otherwise, it's just a piece of agitprop theater, and no one wants to be lectured at. And so I had found a small article about the tiger in the zoo that affected me in a real deep and visceral way. And I found that this was my way into talking about the Iraq War. I had this tiger who was a narrator who could talk about it that was apolitical. It wasn't an American talking about Iraq or an Iraqi talking about Iraq. It was like this wild animal who had no idea what was going on, and a ghost for that matter. So it was, I was already kind of lifting myself out of like the nuts and bolts of the political arena and writing a ghost story. So I think that when you're dealing with kind of, especially like volatile issues, as an artist, I think it behooves one to kind of find your way into a story organically, rather than saying, I gotta write about this because it's important for the world. It's more about how it's important for me as a writer. As far as Robin Williams, he was just terrific. He was a great performer. He never deviated from the script like many of us thought he might. One of the interesting things about him is that he was a great castmate for the other actors on stage, and he was always conscious of the fact that he had taken someone else's job. The guy who played the tiger in Los Angeles, Kevin Tighe, was a great actor. When we went to Broadway, they needed to get a movie star, you know, and Robin kind of was conscious of that, and was always very, had a lot of humility surrounding that, and he was a great man.
We're performing Gruesome Playground Injuries at our university next year, so it's one of my favorite plays. I'm really interested to know. We're performing Gruesome Playground Injuries at our university next year, and I'm very interested to know about the wide variety of experiences that obviously happen within that show, and I guess your personal connection to some of those stories that you'd be willing to share with us. Some of them obviously relatable to everyone, some of them very specific, and I'm interested to know how many of those actually came up in your life that might be based on something that you actually know someone that's experienced or something of that nature, versus how much of it was purely out of imagination.
Well, like we saw in my journal entry before, it did come from a conversation I had with my buddy Keith, and he was telling me about all these injuries he had accrued in his life, many of which are related in that play. And we talked about them, and I known almost my whole life, and I hadn't known that so many of these things, terrible, awful, grotesque things had happened to him. And I started thinking, like, well, if you wrote your memoir, every chapter could be an injury. And that made me think about marking, like, the story of one's life through the injuries that we have endured, and that led to a thought about, like, what you could chart a love story that way. And it started to emerge of a dramatic question: why do we sometimes hurt ourselves to gain someone else's love? And that's a provocative question to me. And I think it's the question that both Doug and Kayleen are grappling with in that play. Yeah.
How would you describe your process with writing? Is it very methodical, or I guess just what is that? And do you have any advice outside of journaling and writing for future writers?
My process is different for every project, it seems to me. I think that sometimes I will outline a work and try to adhere by the outline. Other times I just start writing scenes. Other times I just do a lot of note-taking about a project. But I think if there's one kind of constant, it's that my rewriting is so intense. And the early drafts of any of my plays, almost none of them actually resemble the play that it ends up being. Characters are changed, are cut out, are added. The entire approach might be changed. The lens from which we're watching it is changed. Guards of the Taj used to take place over 40 years in these two guys' lives, and then I changed that after writing a few drafts to make it over a few days. Some of my other plays have just been entirely different types of entertainment. Like they've gone from being dramas to being comedies or vice versa. And so I always feel like you don't know what you have until you have a full draft of something, and then you have to start the work on it. And so it's a matter of grappling with that and kind of as if I kind of always see the idea of like being a sculptor, and like the first draft is the piece of clay. And so now you have to start actually shaping it and making it into something that makes sense to an audience. Yeah?
I was just curious about, you talked about returning to the Playhouse.
Yeah.
With the Wolf, and you're, with Garry Chisholm and Bengal Tiger at that zoo, various like places within the United States without. I'm just curious, like, being from Cleveland, like what maybe like some of like the playwriting or like writing roots in general, like how Cleveland's like influenced you, like your hometown.
Are you from Cleveland?
I was born in Cleveland, but I'm mostly living in Columbus.
This is really my first play that's been done at a major theater in Cleveland. It's been so it's very exciting for me to be there. I grew up kind of going to the Cleveland Playhouse, and so it's very exciting to be there. And I think that like growing up there, there's a lot of arts in Cleveland, and I was exposed to a lot of it. But I didn't think I wanted to be a theater artist till much later in my life, well after I had left it. So I look back on the experiences there of the plays I saw, the music I saw, as being kind of like, you know, like in this presentation, like early seeds that I didn't even know were affecting me the way they were. I used to work at this outdoor arts venue called Kane Park, and I was a garbage man there. I literally would empty the trash and clean the house. It was a big amphitheater. But I would watch the musicals that they did every summer, like repetitively. I'd watch every night, and I would absorb it, not thinking that I was studying it, but I was. And again, it's like that. I think the act of repetition, ingraining something in you, is something that's really helpful in terms of studying the craft. No matter what you might be doing, directing, acting, designing, writing, I think that to experience a piece of art over and over and over and over and over again so that you know it inside out is a really useful endeavor. Yeah. You get a shout out. I think I can hear you.
Did you talk about a time in your life where you had a strong artistic block and how you worked through that? And perhaps in the same breath, you could talk about a time when you truly feel like you have failed and how that influenced your work.
Yeah, it's a great question. Being blocked and feeling like I have failed. Let's see. I feel blocked often, you have a million ways of like talking about it, saying like, I advise people all the time about their blockages while not being able to address my own, you know. And it just sucks. I don't know how else to describe it. I think that like there's a certain point where you have to start trusting that even if it's bad, it's okay. My screenwriting partner in college used to say that like anyone can write a half a good screenplay, but it takes a real artist to complete a bad one. You know, and I think it's a real good thing to remember is that like it doesn't matter if you have a great idea, and it doesn't matter if you have a great first act. It matters that you complete something and then move from there, like I said before. And I think that as easy as it would be to stand up here to say that, it's something that I continue to not believe sometimes. And in terms of like failing, I mean like, it's like, I feel like failure in my head always comes like very like retrospectively. I think I'm lucky enough that I don't feel like I'm ever failing in the moment. I feel like if I'm actively working on something, it can't be considered a failure. So the only things that can be considered failures are something that you look back on and in retrospect say, yeah, that was a failure. But most of those in my life have less to do with writing and more to do with behavior. What I mean by that is that I have some regrets about how I did not assert myself as a person in the room during certain productions of mine. That I let myself be steamrolled by theaters or by producers or by directors. And this was early on in my career. I think I've learned from it, but I still wish that I had had a little more grit and kind of courage when it came to standing up for myself. Because there's a trap that I think any young artist is going to fall into, which is you are just so grateful to be given the chance to do something. You know, so you'll be like, yeah, thank you. And that's actually while there's an element of truth to that, because everyone needs their first break, and you don't want to alienate people by being an asshole, but sometimes you need to be, and it's a real fine line, and you know, like it's everyone has to figure out who they are when they reach a different level in their career, and I still am, and I think that every time I feel like I enter a different phase in my life and career, I'm still figuring out, you know, what that means. And but I think it's important to just remember, like, at least for me, when you asked me about failures, is like, that's the thing that I feel like I failed at, was not being assertive enough in the room.
A question in the balcony?
Oh, yeah.
Hi. You mentioned working in both drama and comedy, and I was wondering two things. One was how do you differentiate them, like, in your writing style? But also, you talked about, like, actually switching something that wasn't drama into a comedy, and what is the process about going through that, and how do you do it?
It's a great question, because I say that as if I see them as, like, discrete entities, drama and comedy, and I don't. I think that, like, the funniest shows on TV are dramas, you know, like, I think that like Sopranos and Breaking Bad are the two of the funniest shows I've ever seen in my life, and it's because the comedy works in a different way. When the stakes are high, when life or death situations are at hand, there's a certain gallows humor that comes out. I think that, you know, so I tend to feel like I write dramas that hopefully have a lot of comedy within them. And I feel that when I have gotten, when I started out some plays,